Welcome to our Lunch and Learn workshop. It's the next in our Lunch and Learn series. It's been fantastic for the whole of 2023. I know we started this last year and it's been just gathering momentum with more and more firms wanting to learn now in this, I call it a little practical and little session over the next 40 minutes or so. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Paul Jansen. We're here thanks to Hall Chadwick's Professional Partners Education and our fantastic supporters of Profit Master, Global Outsourcing, iKeep, and Lloyd's Auctions. Now, massive shout out to Danielle, as Danielle Morrison, most of you have been invited here from Danielle, friends of Hall Chadwick, friends of Professional Partners Education, or what we call it PPE. I know Danny's just gone on maternity leave, and we wish her all the best for her pending motherhood. Now, Danny will be back in 2024. It's hard to believe we're into mid-November already. Now, to all of you sitting there, we know there's a number of firms, but we also know there's a number of firms with teams sitting in boardrooms. So welcome to all of you that are joining us from your boardroom as well with a bite to eat. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, PPE, what is it? Well, it's your educational platform that we've built for you, our accounting community. So if you've missed anything with regards to any of these live lunch and learn workshops, our practical technical sessions, or my masterclass series, that is also every single month, just go to our YouTube channel, go to a YouTube page, type in Professional Partners Education, and up will pop up all the content there. It's free of charge. It's free for you to use. Claim your CPD, and it's some fantastic content on there. So please feel free to use it. Now, our topic today, we're talking about restructuring and trade-on strategies, and we have a special guest joining us. So for the next 40 minutes, strap yourself in. If you've got any questions throughout the session, please use the Q&A bar down below, because we'll have time to get to questions, that's for sure. Let me introduce you to my special guest, Andrew Crawley from Hall Chadwick. How are you, mate? Welcome back.
I'm good, Paul, and thank you very much.
It's always great to have you back and here to talk about these sort of topics. And I know it's going to be one that obviously with the amount of firms that have registered and jump on board, it's very topical, I suppose. No doubt one of the biggest topics in our industry, with directors of companies, I suppose, looking for different strategies, and whether it's a trade on, whether it's restructuring. We know there's financial pressure out there. And I suppose, to be fair, it's not just ATO financial pressure. And I know a number of firms that I talk to, given the amount of firms that I work with, they're always saying, well, yeah, we put our clients into ATO repayment plans. But as we spoke about maybe a couple of months ago, we spoke about how it doesn't seem to be the longer term solution, because 8 out of 10 default. So we're here to talk about some different types of strategies, which we're going to get into. Before we do that, mate, we might just get to you, spend a couple of minutes on yourself, Andrew. Probably what you do, how you do it, and more importantly, why you do it. That's all right to explain to everyone online.
Yeah, of course. Look, I'm a director with the Hall Chadwick Group, predominantly around the insolvency area. I'm not a liquidator or a lawyer. I came to the group because I ran my own advisory firm for about 12 years out of Melbourne, which was an advocacy, if you like, to support directors in some sort of distress, either financial or statutory. And I've been with Hall Chadwick now for about 5 years, but working pretty much around the restructure and the trade-on sort of aspects.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's why a number of firms that call it the firms that Hall Chadwick works with, likes working with you in particular, because one, you're not a liquidator, and the liquidator tends to represent the creditors. No disrespect to liquidators, and we obviously work with quite a lot of them, although you take a different approach, and that's what we're looking at sharing today, aren't we?
I think so. And a lot of things that come through the door of Hall Chadwick may not be ready for insolvency. This is where you get to your trade on. It may even be that I don't mean push them away, my apologies. It may even be that a better resolution is simply a refinance or something of that nature. So I'll identify all of that. But if we do go through the restructure process, I'll stay with the accountant and the director all the way through it. We're working with the liquidators, the lawyers, everybody, making sure everyone's got a clear understanding, getting through to the outcome that we want.
Yeah, well said. And I think we're going to touch on that today as well, in terms of how accounting firms, exactly what you mentioned just before, can act as the advisor. At the end of the day, they're your clients. You always want to act in the best interest of your clients, but there's that advisory role where you can work with us as well. And I think we're going to touch on that over the next 40 minutes or so to give you guys a bit of an idea on the role that you can play. Let's get into this. And we touched on this probably a couple of months ago as well. We spoke about that there's probably about $86 billion of ATO debt out there. We know that there's a lot of activity, a lot of reporting in the media to what the ATO are doing. Andrew, are you okay to talk briefly about what you can see and hear at present?
Well, it's all well down the track. The ATO is back into full flight. Look, they're the largest unsecured creditor in the country. They're in every liquidation and often the major one. They did give everybody a lot of time over COVID, all the directors. They were pretty good, I thought. And they gave a lot of warnings for directors to bring their taxes and things up to date, knowing full well that there were issues over COVID. That sort of over the last year has become more and more intense. They've got to the stage now where they thought, well, we've given you all the time in the world to fix it, so we're going to force you to fix it, or we're going to impose issues upon you. And we're seeing that very heavily now with wind-ups are probably back to about 20 to 30 a week that are going through, I call that the wind-up process on foot. The big one at the moment is, and I think everyone out there is going to know this, is DPNs. And the difference between lockdown DPNs and the 21-day DPNs, but DPNs are major issues. The point is, the ATO are back to where they were. They're no more aggressive than where they were, regardless of what you hear. They're not. They were always aggressive, and they have to be. But they're back in full flight, mate. Yep, absolutely.
So you mentioned two types of DPNs there. You okay to just quickly touch on that? You say a lockdown and 21-day?
Yeah. So as most of everyone on this would know, you can be a director in your liquidation can be personally liable to the ATO for tax if it wasn't lodged within a period, if the BASs weren't lodged within the right period. I think it's 90 days from the due date, but if it extends from that, then the directors could be personally liable. Now we're finding they are. So they'll just send a DPN, and this is what we call lockdown DPN, and that DPN arrives, and there's no 21 days, there's no 24 hours.
Right.
It's more of a notification that you are now personally liable for this amount of money. And that's versus a standard DPN, where the standard DPN gives you the 21 days to correct it. You can either make an arrangement or go into liquidation or go through a trade on, which is what we're talking about.
That's right. That's right. And sometimes, and again, hopefully we'll actually touch on this, because sometimes people or directors of companies don't believe there's any other choices available. So, and I suppose that's what this is all about, to actually share this with the firms that are online, our accounting community, to then share this with their clients. And ideally, if you need more information, more high-level advice, and just options, to talk to us. And that's probably the main thing about this. Well, let's get into I suppose Hall Chadwick has always prided themselves on the ability to restructure a business or work with directors to have them trade on. Let's talk about, this firstly. And can you probably explain what constitutes a restructure?
Yeah, well, look, for me, restructure is the next step from a refinance. And so to explain that to you, anybody can go out and get a lender to borrow money for whatever it might be, but in this case, to deal with bills or restructure bills and debts. The thing is, there's a point where they won't do that. Now, where it reaches that point, there's a number of specialist lenders out there, and I think you've had someone who's a guest in your podcast. I'm sure I saw just a couple of months back with Oak. And these are specialist lenders that understand this area. So what they say is, look, we understand that your business in its current position, you can't borrow money, so it's probably insolvent. However, if it went through a restructure with a practitioner, a regulated practitioner, and subject to that being presented to us, we might fund it anyway. So you're talking about, when I talk about a restructure, I'm talking about a combination of external funding and working in play with either a voluntary administration normally, or lately the small business restructure.
Yeah, I think that's some of the challenges that business owners have sometimes, whether hopefully they do talk to their accountant and their accountant has got other options, but I've seen times as well where they just go and source that external funding to get them over the line. But that external funding is only short term. It puts enormous pressure on them down the track as well. And that's the challenge that directors have.
And Paul, one of the frustrations, it's not frustrating, it's disappointing, because often that funding you're talking about is the last bit of funding that's going to be available through the main central bankings for that company. And the frustrating thing is that the amount of money a director might borrow for a Band-Aid, a tax bill or whatever it is, if you go through a restructure, that could resolve 100% of their debt and let them go forward. That one loan could take out everything. And that's why it's really important to get some advice prior to doing it.
No, I agree. So Great. That's the let's call it the restructure. Can you also explain what's involved in, let's say, a trade-on scenario then?
When we do a trade-on, it's usually a voluntary administration, lately an SBR, which I'll address in a moment. But the purpose of a voluntary administration, I know a lot of you know this, but I'll explain it to you. It's an act of insolvency, but the purpose of the act, ironically, is to give a company the best possible chance to continue trading. So the administrator will go in, take over the company for a period of 6 weeks, say, go 2 weeks either way of that. It can be extended, but in that period, they'll do their forensic examinations of all their books and accounts. They'll work with the directors. They'll give the director every possible opportunity to look at how the company might go forward. And, that might be that it can go forward if it only pays 20 cents on the dollar on all of its debts. And it pays that over 18 months. And that would, the administrator will then put that together. He'll have a look at it all. And if he can recommend that over a liquidation by way of return to the creditors, then they'll put that to a vote and that can get up and the company trades under what we call a deed of company arrangement or a DOCA.
Okay.
And then the company's handed back to the director after that period of time, which might only be, as I said, could be as little as 4 weeks, it could be longer. And they trade forward and the company's cleaned up. The company's also better off as it's not all of the companies have their accounts and their financials in order, but I promise you, once you come out of a VA, you will have.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. So that's good. So there's your two different, I suppose you've got a restructure and then you've got a trade-on scenario. So look, I suppose with a lot of the accountants out there and a lot of the firms in our network, that they've got to place a lot of trust in any sort of restructuring practitioner that they recommend to their client. So why should they be recommending someone like Hall Chadwick?
Because we trade on people. So to explain that to you, when it comes to a voluntary administration in the past, these are not research stats, but they're right. In the past, you would find that out of every 10 companies that went into a voluntary administration, 7 of them would be followed up with a liquidation. So that means that the deed of company arrangement didn't go forward, the company went into liquidation. Now, the problem here is that the whole point of going into a voluntary administration is to support the directors by avoiding a liquidation. Once you go into liquidation, then the liquidation it's a completely different role. And the liquidator then comes in and he's got to act in accordance with corporations law to give recoveries against that director. And all of a sudden, the thing you went into to save the business has become your worst nightmare. Now your house is at risk.
Yes.
The reason you would come to Hall Chadwick is we're one of the few, and there's a couple of others, but we're one of the few that genuinely won't take on a VA unless we're going to restructure it and bring it out the other end or trade it on. So we'll take on the personal exposure to do all of that, because there may well be that throughout the VA period, if the company runs at a loss, our administrators have to take on that loss personally. So we will look at it, we'll put ourselves on the line, we'll work with the directors and we'll come out the other end. And I can tell you right now, our stats are 8 out of 10 that go into VA come out under a DOCA, and usually the other 2 that don't were something that we discussed and agreed with the director mutually.
Okay. So very different statistics to what is out there in the other side.
And I don't want to criticize, I really don't want to criticize any other practitioners, but the reality of it is, if you go into a VA, what's the point of getting a week into a voluntary administration, turning around and going, you know what, there's too many exposures here, we're not going to trade this business. Yes. And that's why quite often they go into liquidation, and it brings that personal liability back onto the director. We go in there with the intent of trading the business coming out at the other end and getting a referral from it.
Okay, so it's probably a good opportunity. Can you give us some examples on the, let's say, the VA side? And I think you also spoke about the small business restructure. So are there any examples that you can give us on some of the results you've had with VAs? And I know you mentioned sort of the 8 out of 10 just before, but and then on the small business restructure and the SBRs as well, that Hall Chadwick have been managed?
Yeah, should I briefly just point out, I know most people know now because it's so prevalent. Should I briefly point out what an SBR is opposed to a VA? Just to clear that up. So the SBR is the small business restructure. The thing about the small business restructure is, if you've got less than $1 million worth of debt, then it's an option provided by the government. It's like a mini voluntary administration, a mini VA if you like, but it's significantly better all around, because the administrator or the practitioner doesn't take control of your business in that period. It can be over and done within 20 days, but it's got to be less than $1 million, not in debt. So that's a brief analogy of what an SBR is as opposed to a VA. The sort of results we're getting, well, they vary significantly. If you're just looking at the SBR, predominantly in the SBR, you would understand the ATO is the major creditor in 80% of them. So really, we're submitting a plan to the ATO, if you like, for the ATO to approve. Now, the other creditors will need to vote on it as well, but if the ATO vote in favour of it, most of them will follow. What we're finding is that the ATO have been quite happy supporting companies at 20 cents in the dollar for payments up to 2 or 3 years, over a period of 2 or 3 years. There's been we had one go through a significantly less than that, around about 8 cents, but there were very good reasons for it. But generally, I think if you're an accountant out there and you've got somebody that might be in half, or a firm that might be in $500,600,000 worth of debt, in your mind, you should be thinking an SBR might produce around 20 cents in the dollar. But come to us, come to me, we'll talk about it, and there might be reasons for it to be even better than that. And we have had significantly less than that, subject to those reasons. Yeah.
And I think that's why, even talking to a lot of the firms following the last couple of months when we spoke about the SBRs in particular, and I know the ATO are also reporting a higher number of SBRs being presented, and also obviously results coming through. But the great part about that is there's even, I was with a firm over lunch last week, and they were saying the great part about it is for her client that this went through. It's not just on the ATO debt, it's on total debt. So usually we go into an ATO repayment plan just for ATO debt. But now that there's a greater understanding of how the SBR works, yes, you've got to have less than $1 million in obviously loans out there. So if you've got less than that, it can work really well for a lot of businesses. And as you said, totally supported by the ATO.
100%. It's a great tool. The thing about the ATO, we went through this in a whole session. The thing about the ATO repayment plans are they're the greatest thing on earth, provided the company's not in trouble.
Yes.
So it's the biggest irony of all time. But they are terrific and they are wonderful, but that's not how they're used. They're usually used for insolvent companies and they're not coming out of them. So for the same amount of repayments, you could probably, as you just pointed out, you could probably satisfy 100% of the unsecured debt.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's also, Paul, it's the same with the VA. Okay. The VA is a much bigger project, but it's the same with the VA. This is the intention of the VA, is to satisfy all of these debts and move forward.
Yeah.
When it comes to results with the voluntary administration, I mean, on the other side of things, we've done we're doing one now, we've done a number of them, significant voluntary administrations, whereas we were appointed mainly because of disputes between shareholders and directors. So it was as much that as it was financial. And in those cases, we've sold businesses and we've returned 100 cents in the dollar to the creditors. But that was always the intention. But that's not the main thing. The main reason you go in is because you're insolvent. Okay. So in those cases, we've got one right now. It's a construction firm, and when we went through the whole thing, the deed of company arrangement has been approved by all of the creditors. Is that there's going to be a variable return dependent on a specific contract, and that return will be somewhere between 1 or 10 cents, and that's how the docker reads.
Okay.
Now it's getting to the end of that now, and it's going to end up being about 3 or 4 cents in the dollar. So you can have that. But look, we've had a number where it's just almost a tidy up, and it's really just a situation of tax debt and a couple of other creditors. But and it just got out of control. That's all that happened. This was actually quite a good business, and we've settled those for 30 cents in the dollar, and the companies have been very, very happy, to pay that. And the thing about, if I can also point out, with these dockers, or whether it's the SBR plan, they can be paid over a period of time. So we've done dockers without any problems over 18 months and up to 2 years, where you repay whatever that 30 cents or the 3 cents in the dollar is over that period. And the legislation allows under the SBR for up to 3 years. So there's ways to get out, but we're not going to recommend something unless it can actually repay the debt or the restructured debt, as well as continue. And we've saved a lot of people. The other thing, I'm sorry I'll talk too much because I love this. The other thing that you've got to keep in mind about the SBR and the VA is it forgives all sins of the past with the director. So whatever's gone on inside that company, and I don't mean anything criminal at all, but a lot of small businesses, and we've all seen it, they'll use the company bank account as their own bank account from time to time. Now, in a liquidation scenario, that's a problem. Because if there's been money drawn by a director and it hasn't been applied to wages, whether or not there's a 7A loan applied, the liquidator will look at that as a loan and they'll claim it back. So there's a number of ways that the director can become personally liable, uncommercial transactions, all sorts of things. The VA and the SBR forgives all the sins of the director. It does not look at those. And we just get everything in order, we hand it back to you, and that's your company.
On you go. Clever. And I think that's what's great about, again, the amount of firms where, or the companies as well, but the firms that you've worked for that with those sorts of results. I think that's what I continue to hear as well. Now, from a Hall Chadwick point of view, I know there's, Hall Chadwick are obviously very qualified in the regulatory space of restructuring firms. And however, I also know that ASIC regularly sends out warnings to business owners regarding unqualified and unregulated advisors operating in this space. Are you okay to touch on this?
Yeah, I'll be careful though, if that's all right. Firstly, let me say that for the 12 years I ran my own firm, it would have been classified in that area. And that area is treated as pre-insolvency by ASIC. I was doing it right, and so do a number of other firms. So the issue about ASIC's concern around some of these people is that that's exactly right. They're unregulated or unqualified, and they can do what they want. Now, the issues where I had problems with them, and the main reason I joined Hall Chadwick and brought that business in here, and we don't do that stuff anymore, is because I was the best of a bad bunch, right? And that's the truth. Where these advisors will come in is that the advisor can't make money through the period of voluntary administration. So sometimes, it's difficult for them to do it. So sometimes an advisor who's perhaps not as professional as a few of us might trade a company without going into voluntary administration for a period of time, and it's already insolvent, right? But they might be recommending it because they don't want to go into the voluntary administration. Firstly, they can't be involved if it is. And it just trades for that period. They'll be getting paid their fees or whatever their fees are, and it's getting worse and worse because the company is insolvent. It's creating a personal liability on the director. So, and again, I want to promise you, I'm not talking about every one of them, okay? But unfortunately, there's a large number. And the problem with it is, once it then gets to the end of that, it goes into liquidation anyway, and there's no money to fix anything. Okay, it's a difficult area. That's why the government's against it. And if you need any more information, just go to the Four Corners website, and there's 100 of them. Just to click on. And I think ASIC would act if they could, a little firmer, perhaps regulate that area, but that's way above my pay rate. Why they're not doing that? Yeah.
So is this why one of the key things, and I suppose we mentioned it earlier in terms of, is this where sometimes, let's call it pre-insolvency advisors, could be these guys that we're talking to right now. So the director's existing accounting firm, be that advisor, would they need to be, surely would they need to have experience in insolvency to do that?
Well, everybody listening on this podcast is probably more qualified than a few of those people that put themselves forward as being an advisor in that area. Look, I believe that Hall Chadwick give you an opportunity. When I say you, I'm talking to the accountant.
Yes.
Give the accountant the opportunity to actually fulfill that role, not with the title, but to fulfill the role. And the reason is that they can deal with me. So even though there's the administrators or the liquidators, whatever it is, have got their own responsibilities, I'll be involved through the whole process with relationship management, if you want to call it that. Now, the main issue around these things is compliance by the director. Now, the compliance by the director, in my opinion, the best person to advise them is their accountant.
It's the accountant.
Okay, so whether it be financial information or whatever it is, I think if the way that a lot of accountants have been working, if you're out there, thank you very much, if you're one of them, is that they'll call me into a room when there's an issue, and they'll call the director into the room. We talk about it, and we decide to go ahead with it. If that happens, the director should not be looking anywhere else for advice. And I'll tell you the beauty about this, Paul, and this is why I believe personally that accountants are probably the best pre-insolvency advisors in the country, because they are regulated, they are qualified, and the fact that they don't have a lot of depth in insolvency is irrelevant, because the people they're dealing with do.
Yes.
So you've got one qualified professional dealing with another qualified professional. So these accountants can simply talk to me or talk to the administrator about what needs to be done, and they stick with their own director all the way through. Now, I'll tell you if you don't mind, because I'll tell you, we just had one of these, and it just worked beautifully. We've had a number of them, it's just one of them. And the accountant, we did exactly that. We sat down with the director, we sat down with the accountant, we put it through a voluntary administration, and we brought it out under the docker. Now, 9 out of 10 times, if that happens and that director refers, another friend gets into trouble and refers someone, they'll refer me.
Yes.
We handle the VA. But in this case, they're referring the accountant because they saw the accountant as controlling the whole process on the way through. He was involved in every bit of it, and it was terrific. And it also reduced our costs. Right? So we have to charge on for all the work we did when the accountants were preparing it, and the accountant charged, and rightfully charged all the way through. And I'll tell you something, they charged a lot less than a pre-insolvency mob would have charged, right? And did a much better job. So I'm glad you raised this. Actually, I actually believe that in the insolvency process, whether even if it's a liquidation, but certainly if it's a trade on, I think the accountant should be more and more involved, and they should be almost taking the lead role from the director's perspective. Okay, so the administrators and the practitioners at our firm, they've got to control. That's how it works.
Yep.
However, from the director's perspective, there's no reason why they see it as the accountants very heavily involved.
Yeah, and I think it's a great opportunity. I know in the past we've often spoken about, certainly on these types of shows as well, we've always spoken about what's the advisor role. We know there's a lot of accountants that want to move away from their day-to-day role to be more of that advisor role. They've got the relationship. That's probably the key thing as well, isn't it? Because and that trust comes with the relationship.
I'll tell you something, Paul, and I've seen this on many occasions. 100% they've got the relationship going into this scenario, but it's a stronger one coming out.
Yeah,
it's a stronger relationship coming out, because all of a sudden you're not, and please don't take this the wrong way, because the accountants we deal with are far more than tax advisors. But from a director's perspective, you're not just a tax advisor. Now you're an advisor to the firm.
That's exactly right.
And I personally don't believe you can do that if the accountant's dealing directly just with a liquidator, for example, because the liquidator's got to represent. He can't give the accountant too much information that's that the director might use to get the best possible lawful result. But I will.
Yes.
I'll give it to you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's probably the perfect scenario in terms of, for firms that are looking to move. I know it's been well used in terms of moving from compliance to advisory. What does advisory look like? Well, this is a great example of what advisory work can look like, and probably the opportunity that exists to a lot of the PPE firms within our network. That's fair to say, isn't it?
I think it is. And I think I always have wondered, and I think it's also the same with finance brokers to some extent as well, whereas these larger issues around insolvency and around trade-ons, these directors are not going to get through it without the support of the tax advisors, the lawyers, okay? So they're going to need lawyers on all of these things from time to time. I just think there should be more and more involvement from accountants. And I do understand why there isn't, is because liquidators want to take it all over. Because they have to. They're not bad for doing that. That's their responsibility.
That's
right.
Take
it over. But before we hand it over to the liquidator, let's sit down, have a talk about it all. Let's work out with the director how he's going to fit in. And don't forget, Hall Chadwick had me on board. And when you think about it, my role may even reduce their revenue and their income that they're going to get from it. But it's just how we feel about things. We want business coming out the other end.
Yes.
That's why I exist. We don't you can't charge for me, but I'm there if you need me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that's the other great thing from the accountant's point of view as well. At the end of the day, they don't want to lose a client either. Most accountants that I know are very invested in their clients' businesses, and they care about their clients' businesses, and they're constantly providing that advice. But this is the opportunity that exists to get involved and to get them into a trade-on position. I think that's the beauty of where this lies as well.
And the other thing, 100%, and a lot of the frustration that I've seen come from accountants is because they've gone into this type of arrangement believing a certain thing. But when you get to the end of the arrangement, that's not what occurs. So their directors or their clients, for example, you could go in thinking, oh, well, this is going to cost us $20,000. And by the end of it, they've got a $300,000 bill for a 7A loan or something, okay? And just that's through a liquidation, not a VA, because the 7A loan wouldn't be an issue in a VA because it's a trade-on. But the whole thing is these initial discussions, if we sit down, we get them all on the table. It's so much easier for me having a conversation with the accountant in the room, because when I can ask these questions, I get the answer.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Director says, no, I haven't taken any money. Well, okay, let's have a look. There's no 7A loan in the record. So, okay, you say you haven't, so be it. And, with the accountant in the room, it's a different conversation. We can talk about genuine results. It's then I take on the responsibility personally to get that result. The administrator's got to grant that, so does the liquidator. But if we look at everything rationally, it's terrific. It's just so much easier if we can work with the accountant. Yeah,
well said. Well said. Look, we're going to open up the lines right now. So if you've got a question, thoughts, ideas, anything you'd like to share, throw them into the Q&A bar, please. I think this is a great opportunity. Because we know nearly every firm that I talk to has got clients that are in that financial stress, or you would know if you're online right now, you'd know clients that are on an ATO repayment plan. But if they're on that plan, well, they might have defaulted, they might have a DPN, they're already struggling. As Andrew said before, they could be insolvent already before they go into the repayment plan. So this is where I suppose other strategies are there in place for you guys as accountants to actually talk to your clients about and give them different options. So lines are open. If you've got any questions that you'd like to ask Andrew, please feel free. Andrew, I know you obviously work with, I know you're Melbourne based here with me, but obviously you work on a national scale.
Yeah, I do. So yes, I do. We've got offices all over the country. I'm in all of them most weeks. And the reason is that's my choice. It's not a requirement. It's my choice to sit in front of the directors prior to them signing their forms. Yep. So I want to be part of the relationship all the way through between the director and the liquidator, or the administrator or the practitioner in an SBR. So I like to meet them. So I want the director to go in knowing exactly what he's going to get. When you mentioned something there, I just wanted to point out also to people listening, because the ATO is so active, often no one knows that a wind-up notice is on foot or is about to be served. Once a wind-up notice is on foot, you can't appoint your own liquidator. It's very difficult to appoint your own administrator too, but we can do that. But one of the things that they have been the courts have been very good on are the SBRs. So if there's a wind-up notice on foot, quite often the courts will just let an adjournment take place for the period that you go through the SBR. And if the SBR occurs, then everything's fine. So whilst I believe the best result for the accountants is to get in early and have a chat with me, Hall Chadwick, but let me come, please. Right? Have a chat with me first. If it's at the death and your client hasn't told you what's going on, which, let's be fair dinkum, happens, and all of a sudden you think it's all over, still have a chat to me. Have a chat to me, because it might not be.
Yes, nothing to lose, I suppose, have you, at that stage?
Well, no, you've got nothing to lose, and you've got houses to save.
Yes.
Yeah, so you've got family homes and houses to save, and that's what I care about.
Yeah, very, very true. Well, it looks like we haven't got any questions there.
Must have answered everything, mate.
The good thing, because we've covered most things, if that's what it's all about. So, mate, great little session. And I think, you were talking about SBRs before. Now, I don't know, I shouldn't even say this, but I've also heard a whisper that they're considering raising the $1 million up to $2 million. Is that something that's up for discussion at the moment?
Look, they started the SBRs about 2 years ago and they were never done. It was only about 8 months ago that it came into play, and they started using them. Now there's significant number being used. Yes, I've heard the same conversations. Okay, but I've also heard things of bankruptcies being brought back to a year. I hear about this stuff all the time.
Right.
I don't know the answer to your question. I would imagine they're considering it.
Yep.
It's a big get out for business.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there'd probably be a bit of pushback from a lot of the business communities, with all creditors being adversely affected, if you like.
Yes.
But look, it wouldn't surprise me, because they're voting for this and they love it and it works.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And we've seen the increase in the amount of SBRs that are going through the system. Like you mentioned, it's been in place for about a couple of years now, but probably really coming to play for maybe the last 8 months. Well, this year.
That's it, this year.
Brilliant. Well, mate, thank you. Thanks for a great little session again. Again, probably the best thing, where do people find you if they want to find you?
Hall Chadwick will send an email around to everybody if that's okay. Honestly, I'd recommend ringing me on my mobile. Call the office. I'm in Melbourne. I'm in Brisbane. I'm in Sydney this week. But call me on my mobile, and I promise you, I can be sitting in front of your office, depending on the urgency of the matter, very quickly. If not, we can do a Teams. If not, just ring me for advice, and I'll get off the phone straight away. I won't bother you again.
Yeah, that's a great part about, again, having just another layer of all the firms online. Just there's a situation you need to talk through it. Doesn't cost you anything to actually have a chat. So yeah, look, if everyone's okay with that, I'll just send out a note after this, just with Andrew's details, and you can contact him directly with any challenges your clients may be facing, and just a sounding board, advice, whatever it may be. I think that's the great part about it. Beautiful. To all of you guys that have joined us, thank you again. Look, it's probably the last one for 2023. It's hard to believe that it's mid-November, but it's probably our last Lunch and Learn. We'll be back for 2024, that's for sure. So thank you for joining us. A quick plug for my next masterclass. So we've got a live panel. It's next Tuesday. We are talking about cyber. We're talking about tech. We're talking about how you can just have a different strategy in place for 2024 with regards to tech and cyber. So I've got 3 experts joining me next week as a part of my masterclass. It's on the 21st of November, 12 p.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time. So if you can join us, please look out for the invitation, and again, jump on board for an hour of power and listen to 3 people that are experts in their field to share information with you, just like we did today with Andrew. So till I see you guys again, thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Cheers.